We'll pick it up again in the middle of chapter 1. Remember, they were just reading about Sherlock Holmes and everything he had to do. Soon, the classroom was empty, except for Og the Frog and me. Classroom pets like us don't get to go outside for recess. Once we were alone, I squeaked to my neighbor, who lives in a tank next to my cage. Og, why do you think that ad asked for someone with red hair? He splashed around a little in the water side of his tank, then leaped up and said, boing, boing. He sounds like a broken guitar string, but he can't help it. I guess it's just the sound he makes. I guess Og doesn't know much about red hair. He doesn't have any hair or fur at all, and he's very, very, very green. I don't have any ideas either, I said, but I'm sure going to think about it. When my friends came back, they were anxious to hear about the other mystery. You know, class, when we read, we're all detectives, the teacher said. We all looked puzzled. Sometimes we come across a word we don't know, right? She asked. Everyone nodded, including me. So, to figure out what the word means, we look for a clue, Mrs. Brisbane continued, just like Sherlock Holmes. Try this sentence. Then Mrs. Brisbane wrote something very mysterious on the board. The twins looked so much alike, I was pie-whacked when I tried to tell them apart. Pie-whacked? That word had never been on our vocabulary list. Lots of my friends giggled when they saw the word. Who knows what pie-whacked means? Mrs. Brisbane asked. Thomas raised his hand. I think it means hit someone in the face with a pie. Everybody laughed, including me. But that didn't make much sense in the sentence about the twins. Let's try again, Mrs. Brisbane said. She wrote another sentence. The rules of soccer can be very pie-whacking if you've never seen a game before. This time, more students giggled. Pie-whacked? Pie-whacking? What was she trying to say? Were there pies flying at the soccer game? Look at how the word is used in the sentences to get some clues, she told us. Mrs. Brisbane wrote one more sentence on the board. When the teacher put the wrong answers on the board, there was a lot of pie-waction in the classroom. Pie-waction? Was there a pie fight in the classroom? Or had my teacher lost her mind? I'm confused, I blurted out, even though all that my human friends heard was squeak. Confusion! Slow down, Simon shouted. I'm sorry to say he forgot to raise his hand before speaking. Confused? Too helpful, Holly said. She raised her hand, but didn't wait for the teacher to call on her before speaking. Let's see if that word works, Mrs. Brisbane said with a smile. The twins looked so much alike, I was confused when I tried to tell them apart. That worked for me. How about the rules of soccer can be very confusing if you've never seen a game before, she continued. And finally, when the teacher put the wrong answers on the board, there was a lot of confusion in the classroom. Now, I was positive that pie-whack meant confused. For your homework tonight, there are 5 more mystery words to figure out, she said, as she handed Rolling Rosie the homework sheets to pass out. Unfortunately, Rosie didn't give me one, so I couldn't see what the mystery words were. I tried making up my own mystery words like flapple and scarrot, but they just made me hungry. Get it? Apple and carrot. Oh, Humphrey. At the end of the day, just before the bell rang, the door to room 26 swung open, and in walked Mrs. Wright, the physical education teacher. She was clutching a pink jacket and, as usual, wore a shiny silver whistle on a cord around her neck. Mrs. Wright likes to blow that whistle, and when she does, it makes my ears wiggle and the fur on my neck stand up. It's loud, 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 way too loud for the small, sensitive ears of a hamster. Mrs. Wright also likes rules. Okay, she loves rules. I can understand why someone who teaches children to play games would love rules, because rules are very important to games. But to squeak the truth, I think she loves rules just a tiny bit too much, and I think Mrs. Brisbane agrees with me. Yes, Mrs. Wright, our teacher asked. Mrs. Wright raised the pink jacket up high. I believe this belongs to one of your students, she said. Normally, I would put it in the lost and found in my office, but her name was inside and I thought she might need it. It's quite chilly out there. Phoebe Pratt? Poor, forgetful Phoebe looked embarrassed as she walked over to get the jacket. Sorry, Mrs. Wright, she said. Students must be responsible for their belongings, Mrs. Wright said. You'd be amazed at what treasures I have in the lost and found. Thank you, Mrs. Wright, Mrs. Brisbane replied. Mrs. Wright paused at the door and fingered her whistle. I steeled myself for a loud blast, but luckily she walked out the door silently. Thomas T. True waved his hand, and Mrs. Brisbane called on him. Don't go to that lost and found, he said. I went there last year, and it was a scary place. Now, what was scary about it? Mrs. Brisbane asked. Thomas's eyes grew wide. There were creepy things, like spider webs and claws. I felt a shiver. Some of my classmates giggled. Oh, and a dead snake. Thomas stopped and thought, maybe it was alive. And I'm pretty sure I saw a severed hand. I felt a quiver. There were gasps and more giggles, and some of my friends went, ew. Mrs. Brisbane walked between the tables toward Thomas. Are you sure that's true? Yes, ma'am, he said. At least, that's what I remember. Well, I don't think Mrs. Wright would keep any of those things in her lost and found, Mrs. Brisbane said. Maybe you just imagined it. Thomas thought for a second. Maybe, but I don't think so. Suddenly the bell rang, and all my friends jumped up from their chairs. Slow Down Simon was the first one out the door, and my other friends were close behind him. All of my classmates had left room 26. Mrs. Wright came back in. That Phoebe is quite forgetful, she said. Have you noticed? Yes, I have. We're working on it, Mrs. Brisbane said. I'd certainly figured out that Phoebe had a problem remembering things like homework and lunches, but I hadn't figured out why. All I really knew about Phoebe was that she lived with her grandmother, who seemed like an unsqueakably nice human. Mrs. Wright nodded politely and headed for the door, but before she left, she turned and said, Please try to encourage your students to visit the Lost and Found. It's right in my office inside the gym. I'll do that, Mrs. Brisbane said. Mrs. Brisbane tidied up her desk for a few minutes. Then she wandered over to her table where Og and I lived next to the window. Have a good night, fellows, she said. I hope today wasn't too pie-whacking for you. See you in the morning. She laughed, and then she left, just like on any other day. See you in the morning. That's what she said. I remember it so well. That's where we'll stop for today. Tomorrow we'll pick it up on the bottom of page 10.